Have you ever wondered why an Amish family of 10 never buys a probiotic supplement, never purchases a gut health product, and has maintained a living fermentation practice in their cellar for 300 years, using foods that the modern grocery store quietly replaced with dead, vinegar-soaked imitations? Sauerkraut is the most common fermented food in any Amish cellar and one of the most misunderstood foods on any American grocery shelf. The jar of sauerkraut sitting in the shelf-stable section of a supermarket is not sauerkraut in the Amish sense. It has been pasteurized, heated to a temperature that kills all bacterial activity, and packed in vinegar rather than salt brine. Every living microorganism has been destroyed. The Amish version is made from two ingredients only: shredded cabbage and non-iodized salt. The cabbage is massaged until it releases its own liquid, packed tightly into a ceramic crock, weighted to keep it submerged, and left at room temperature for 2 to 4 weeks, while naturally occurring lactobacillus bacteria convert the sugars into lactic acid. The result is alive, tangy, and dense with beneficial bacteria. Fermented pickles, the pickle most Americans grew up eating, is not a fermented food. It is a vinegar-pickled cucumber, preserved through acidity rather than bacterial fermentation, shelf-stable rather than alive, and completely devoid of the probiotic activity that made traditional pickles a health staple in every European and Amish household for centuries. The Amish fermented pickle is made differently. Cucumbers are packed whole into a jar with garlic, dill, and a salt brine solution, typically 2 to 5% salt by weight. No vinegar is added. The jar is sealed loosely and left at room temperature for 5 to 7 days, while naturally occurring lactobacillus bacteria ferment the sugars in the cucumber and produce lactic acid. The resulting pickle is tangy, crunchy, and full of live bacterial cultures. It must be kept cold after fermentation because it is still alive and will continue to sour if left at room temperature. The difference between this pickle and the shelf-stable vinegar version is not a matter of flavor preference. It is the difference between a living food and a preserved one. Sourdough bread in an Amish household is not made from a packet of commercial yeast purchased at the store. It is made from a starter, a living culture of wild yeast and lactobacillus bacteria that is maintained continuously, fed with flour and water on a regular schedule, and used to leaven every loaf the family bakes. Amish sourdough starters are often decades old, passed from mother to daughter the same way seeds and recipes are passed, as a living inheritance rather than a purchased ingredient. The fermentation process that a sourdough starter produces does something commercial yeast does not. It partially breaks down the gluten and phytic acid in the flour before baking, making the finished bread more digestible and allowing the body to absorb more of its minerals. A person who cannot tolerate commercially yeasted bread without digestive discomfort will often find that genuine long-fermented sourdough causes no problem at all. The Amish have been eating this bread for 300 years. The gut health industry recently rediscovered it and began selling it at a premium. Apple cider vinegar in an Amish household is not purchased. It is produced. The apple harvest generates more fruit than any family can eat fresh, more than can be stored in the root cellar, and more than can be dried or canned efficiently. The surplus goes into cider, pressed and fermented in barrels or large crocks. Left to ferment long enough, apple cider becomes hard cider, then vinegar. The Amish manage this process deliberately, allowing the fermentation to proceed through both alcoholic and acetic acid stages until the product is genuine apple cider vinegar with the mother, the living mass of bacterial cellulose that forms naturally during the fermentation process and contains the active microbial cultures that give raw apple cider vinegar its documented properties. The vinegar sold in most grocery stores has been filtered and pasteurized. The mother has been removed. The living cultures are gone. What remains is acetic acid in water, useful for cooking and cleaning, but nutritionally inert. The Amish version, drawn from a crock or barrel, is cloudy, sharp, and alive. It is used as a condiment, a medicinal remedy, a meat marinade, and a cleaning agent. One product from one surplus crop doing 4 jobs across the household. Milk kefir is a fermented dairy product made by adding kefir grains, a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, to fresh milk and allowing it to ferment at room temperature for 24 to 48 hours. The result is a tangy, slightly effervescent liquid that is thicker than milk but thinner than yogurt and contains a significantly greater diversity of probiotic strains than any commercial yogurt product currently sold in American grocery stores. Research on milk kefir has documented its effects on digestive health, immune function, and lactose intolerance. Many people who cannot tolerate fresh milk can consume kefir without difficulty because the fermentation process consumes most of the lactose before the product is eaten. In an Amish household with a dairy cow, kefir production is straightforward. Fresh raw milk from the morning milking is combined with kefir grains in a jar, covered with a cloth, and left on the counter. By the following morning, the milk has fermented. The grains are strained out, rinsed, and returned to fresh milk to begin the next batch. The grains grow and multiply over time. They can be shared with neighbors, passed to family members, and maintained indefinitely with proper care. The Amish household that has maintained kefir grains for a generation has a probiotic culture that is as old as the farm itself. Fermented beets are one of the most heavily preserved vegetables in any Amish cellar, and they are preserved in 2 distinct ways. The first is pickling in a hot vinegar brine, the shelf-stable canned beets that appear at church meals and winter dinners. The second is lacto-fermentation in a salt brine, which produces a completely different product with completely different nutritional properties. Fermented beets are made by slicing or cubing raw beets, packing them into jars with a 2 to 3% salt brine, and allowing them to ferment at room temperature for 5 to 10 days. The result is a tangy, deep red vegetable with a more complex flavor than the fresh beet and a probiotic content that the canned version entirely lacks. The brine itself, the liquid in which the beets ferment, is a traditional drink called beet kvass, consumed in small quantities as a digestive tonic and general health remedy. Beet kvass contains the lactic acid bacteria from the fermentation, the natural betaine and nitrates from the beet root, and a flavor that is earthy, slightly sour, and deeply colored. Eastern European and German communities have consumed beet kvass as a medicinal drink for centuries, and the Amish tradition reflects that same heritage. The fermented beet and its brine represent one of the least known but most nutritionally dense items in the Amish fermentation tradition. Dilly beans are fermented green beans, one of the most practical and productive ferments in an Amish summer kitchen, because green beans produce in enormous quantities over a short window and must be preserved quickly or lost. The conventional approach to surplus green beans is pressure canning, cooked in jars at high temperature, shelf-stable, and nutritionally intact but bacterially dead. The Amish also pressure green beans in large quantities. But the lacto-fermented version, the dilly bean, is a different product made by a different method for a different purpose. Fresh green beans are trimmed, packed vertically into jars with garlic, fresh dill, and a 2 to 3% salt brine. The jars are sealed loosely and left at room temperature for 3 to 7 days while the fermentation proceeds. The finished product is tangy, garlicky, crunchy, and alive with lactobacillus bacteria. It does not need refrigeration during fermentation and stores in a cool cellar for months after. Dilly beans are eaten as a side dish, a condiment alongside meat, and a snack pulled directly from the jar. They are the green bean equivalent of the fermented pickle, a salt brine product that looks similar to a canned or vinegar pickled version but is fundamentally different in its microbial content and its effect on digestion. The Amish garden that produces green beans all summer also produces dilly beans all winter at a processing cost of salt, water, dill, and time. Chow is one of the most distinctively Amish fermented foods and one of the least known outside of communities where it is made. It is a relish produced at the end of the growing season, in late September and October when the first frosts threaten and whatever remains in the garden must be processed immediately or lost. The ingredients vary by household and by what the garden produced that year, but typically include green tomatoes, cabbage, onions, bell peppers, hot peppers, carrots, cauliflower, and whatever other vegetables are still standing when the season ends. These are chopped, combined, salted, and either packed in a fermentation crock for lacto-fermentation or processed in a sweetened vinegar brine for canning. The lacto-fermented version, which is the older and more traditional of the two preparations, produces a tangy, complex relish that is alive with beneficial bacteria and carries the flavors of the entire garden in a single condiment. It is served alongside meats, on bread, mixed into potato dishes, and eaten as a side with church meals. The name chow chow is believed to derive from a French word for cabbage or from a Chinese-English pidgin term that entered American English through trade routes, though its presence in Amish and Pennsylvania Dutch cooking predates any definitive etymology. What is certain is that chow chow represents the Amish principle of zero waste applied to the fermentation tradition. Nothing that came out of the garden at the end of the season goes to the compost before it has been given the chance to become food. Switchel is a fermented beverage that predates every commercially produced sports drink, electrolyte supplement, and energy drink on the American market by several centuries. It was known as Haymaker's Punch in the 18th and 19th centuries because it was the drink carried into the fields by farm workers during the most physically demanding weeks of the growing season, haying time, harvest, and any extended period of outdoor labor in summer heat. The base recipe is simple: water, apple cider vinegar, ginger, and a sweetener, historically molasses, maple syrup, or honey. The mixture is combined, allowed to sit for several hours or overnight, and consumed cold or at room temperature. Some preparations add a small amount of fermentation time, allowing the ginger and apple cider vinegar cultures to develop further before drinking. The result is a mildly acidic, gently sweet, deeply refreshing drink that replenishes electrolytes lost through sweat, supports digestion through the apple cider vinegar and ginger components, and provides sustained energy through the natural sugars in the molasses or maple syrup. Modern analysis of the drink's components confirms what centuries of farm workers already knew through experience. It works. The potassium in the molasses replaces what sweat removes. The acetic acid in the vinegar supports blood sugar stability during prolonged physical exertion. The ginger calms the digestive disruption that heavy labor and summer heat can produce. Switchel disappeared from American tables when commercial beverages replaced it in the early 20th century. It has never left the Amish farm. Fermented and cured meats represent the most complex and least understood category in the Amish fermentation tradition. The process of curing meat, rubbing it with salt, sugar, herbs, and sometimes nitrate salts, then allowing it to rest in controlled conditions, involves a form of microbial activity that is technically a fermentation, even though the Amish do not typically use that word to describe it. The salt draws moisture from the meat, creating an environment where beneficial bacteria can establish themselves while harmful bacteria are suppressed. Cured hams, bacon, and sausage are then typically smoked, exposed to low-temperature hardwood smoke for extended periods, which adds antimicrobial compounds from the smoke while developing the flavor and color that distinguish properly cured meat from fresh. The Amish sausage tradition includes fermented varieties, kielbasa and bologna, that are cured with a salt and spice mixture, packed in a natural casings, and cold smoked for days or weeks before eating. The lactic acid bacteria active during the cure contribute to the tangy flavor that distinguishes genuinely cured sausage from the heat-processed meat products sold in most American delis. What the modern grocery store sells as salami, bologna, or summer sausage is almost universally a heat-processed product that mimics the flavor of fermented cured